Revolutionaries, this is our first video for week 10, day 1. I apologize that I'm getting it to you a little bit late. Our teaching assistant today is Maggie, and our subject is the first wave of the Russian intelligentsia. Now, Maggie is not very intellectually minded, so I'm not sure how long she's going to stick around for, but we'll see what we can do. I'd like to start with a few announcements. Thank you for the good work that you have been doing on the blog these past couple of weeks. There are a few of you who haven't yet made any blog posts. If that applies to you, you probably got an email from me at the end of last week. Now, that email is not intended to guilt you or shame you in any way. It's just my way of checking in. My main goal is to assess, are you doing okay, or are you not doing okay, and have some difficulties that I might need to know about so that I can accommodate you. So if I've emailed you, please do write me back. That's the only way that I have of assessing what your situation is. Second announcement. If you are in a group that has already submitted your midterm media project, oh, there goes the cat, then you got feedback from me over the weekend as well. I was blown away by the really fun and creative and thoughtful projects that you all put together, so congratulations on that. I'm looking forward to getting the last couple of projects as well. And if you have any questions about my feedback, just shoot me an email and I'd be happy to talk about it with you. Now that we're done with the midterms and we've sort of gotten ourselves on track with the remote learning to the extent that it's possible to do that, it's time to start thinking about our final papers. I sent out the assignment by email on Sunday. You can also find it on the course website. It's under the assignments tab. I've scaffolded this assignment into a few different steps to try to make it more manageable. We're in a bit of a time crunch because the end of the semester is fast approaching, if you can believe that. We sort of lost a little bit of time in the transition, and now we are having to basically catch up. So that means that your first deadline is in 1 week. By Sunday, April 12th at 5 p.m., you need to come up with a research question and a list of sources that you plan to use in writing your paper. Now remember, you should only use sources from the syllabus unless you're writing a capstone paper. That means you can dig deeper into a question that we have considered together in class already, or you can take sources from different parts of the syllabus and put them together to ask a new question. But either way, your question should be based on what is in the syllabus, because those are the sources that I can guarantee you have access to. Please do look at that assignment sheet for full details. Let's see. So you need to submit your research question and your list of sources on Sakai. Let's see. Yes. So I realize that the 12th is Easter. Our deadline is on Easter Sunday. If that's a day that you are not going to be working, you're going to be celebrating the holiday, that's no problem. Just get your thing posted on Sakai by the 11th. And that I think should be very doable. I know it's a little bit strange to have such a short deadline, but on the other hand, like, this is a pretty low stakes assignment. All you need to do is come up with a question and pick some sources off of the syllabus, look at the assignment sheet for more details. It shouldn't take you very long to do, actually. And then I will meet with each of you on the 13th and 14th to meet with you individually to talk over your materials and make sure that you're on the right track with this paper. I will share a collaborative document with you through, I think I can share it through OneDrive so that you can sign up for a time in office hours. If you, for whatever reason, are not able to do a video conference, there are various things that can get in the way of that. Just write that next to your name on the sign-up sheet or let me know by email, because I can also telephone you. That's also a way that we can do this meeting. And if you have any questions about the final paper assignment, please just let me know. All right, so today we're talking about the first wave of the Russian intelligentsia. As you read, the intelligentsia began to emerge in the 1820s, but they really sort of get going properly in the 1830s. Last week when we were discussing Pushkin, we talked about how the first half of the 19th century was the golden age of Russian literature. Really, we could broaden that out and say that it was the golden age of Russian culture and intellectualism as well. Thanks to the policies of Catherine II and Alexander I, in this era, Russia had a fairly large community of educated people who were interested in discussing their beliefs about Russia's past, present, and future in a variety of ways. They discussed these issues in person by meeting in discussion circles at each other's houses, and they also discussed them in print by publishing essays in various journals, and it's 2 of those essays that you read for today as your primary sources. Now, I say there's a large community of literate people interested in doing this. What I mean is that it's large enough to be self-sustaining. It is, of course, still very much a minority of the Russian population. It's only a small minority of the Russian population that's even literate at this point, let alone literate and educated. But this is, by now, a self-sustaining community. So I've just said that Catherine II and Alexander I deserve credit for the emergence of the intelligentsia, but we should also give some credit to Nicholas I. Although he was more of a conservative czar, his policies helped to shape the intelligentsia's development. When we talk about the Decembrists way back at the start of the semester, I noted that they took some of their inspiration from the wave of nationalism that spread across Europe in the early 19th century, spurred on by the Napoleonic Wars. Nicholas I was also very much a nationalist. In fact, he summarized his regime's core beliefs with the slogan, orthodoxy, autocracy, nationality. By that, he meant that his subjects owed their loyalty first and foremost to the three pillars at the foundation of their society, and which defined Imperial Russia as a unique among European states: the Orthodox Church, the absolute power of the Tsar, and patriotism for the Russian nation. Now, today we can look at that third term and say, well, that's a little bit problematic because Russia was a multi-ethnic empire. But in Nicholas's time, which was also the era of the first great wave of the intelligentsia, everyone seemed to agree that Russia had a national essence. They weren't as concerned with sort of blood ties as they were with the idea that Russia was somehow unique. What they didn't agree on, where Nicholas split from the intelligentsia and different parts of the intelligentsia split from each other, was on the question of what is that essence? What makes Russians Russian? And how should that influence the way that Russia continues to develop over the course of the future? Nicholas also shaped the first generation of the intelligentsia by putting limits on them. His defeat and harsh treatment of the Decembrists made political revolution unviable for the time being. In fact, many members of the intelligentsia worked for the government and hoped to reform it from within, rather than to overthrow it. And he also instituted a robust censorship regime. His third department controlled all publications and monitored university curricula. And don't forget that Nicholas himself acted as Pushkin's personal censor after 1826, personally reading and vetting everything that Pushkin wanted to publish. So this censorship regime pushed the conversations among the intelligentsia into the realm of literature and history. But of course, they were really talking about politics. So unpacking that is part of what we're doing with our sources today. Another important piece of the puzzle is the social composition of the intelligentsia. As Saunders notes, the majority of educated Russians were still members of the gentry. But a new group was also entering the scene: children of middle-class families and even of free peasants. People well off enough to pay for their children's education, but who lacked titles or access to court circles or any kind of inherited wealth. This group was known as the raznachinцы, and no, you don't have to remember that Russian word. But what you should remember is that it translates to people of various ranks. And that's an awkward term for an awkward group of people. Imperial Russian society was very hierarchically organized. Everybody had a sort of a slot that they fit into, except for the raznachinцы. They didn't fit into these slots because their education and their professional capabilities outstripped their status as commoners. So their different background gave them a different perspective on the major questions of the day and helped to keep the debates among the intelligentsia vibrant. And Vissarion Belinsky, whose letter to Gogol we read for today, he's an example of a member of the raznachinцы. So the most important debate among this first generation of the intelligentsia was the debate between the Slavophiles and the Westernizers. We're going to explore that through our primary sources, so I won't say too much about it now. But basically, for our purposes, Belinsky is a Westernizer, and Kireyevsky, so that's our other author, the guy with the K, those two E's are separate from each other, so you say Kireyevsky. Kireyevsky, as you read, he started out as a Westernizer, but he became a Slavophile. So the essay of his that we're reading for today dates from his Slavophile period, and he is going to be our example of the Slavophiles. All right, something to keep in mind as you read these two pieces. Nicholas I was not any happier with the Slavophiles than he was with the Westernizers. Even though it can seem like the Westernizers might be more in line with Nicholas's conservative position, the thing is, he saw them both as a threat because they both sought major changes in Russian society and governance. Both groups should actually be classified as liberals, just different types of liberals, with different aims in mind. Okay, so I'm going to start with some questions about Chapter 6 in Saunders' Russia in the Age of Reaction and Reform. First question. Based on your reading of this chapter, what are the main characteristics of the intelligentsia of the 1830s to 1850s? How do they compare to the Decembrists in terms of both similarities and differences? What factors enabled the intelligentsia to emerge at this particular moment in Imperial Russian history? I've given you some hints already by referencing Catherine and Alexander, but can you identify previous political revolutions and social revolutions, things we've talked about in previous units of this class, that contributed to making it possible for the intelligentsia to emerge at this particular moment? Number 2. One of the major ways the intelligentsia discussed their ideas was by forming discussion circles. Look through Saunders' description of these circles on page 157 to 159. What makes them so significant? In what ways did they expand the intelligentsia's horizons? And in what ways did they limit them? I'd also like you to think back to Lyudmila Alexeyeva's memoir about the birth of Soviet human rights movement during the Khrushchev era, her book Thaw Generation, which we read a couple weeks ago. So remember that Alexeyeva describes Campania in the 1950s and 60s as being like the 19th century intelligentsia. Well, now that you've learned about the 19th century intelligentsia, do you find this an apt comparison? Is she right that these are basically a similar phenomenon? Why or why not? And if you think that she is right, if you think this comparison makes sense, well, we know that the Soviet Campania became, well, let me just say we know how they evolved over time. We saw that play out in her memoir. So based on that, if this is an apt parallel, what do you expect to happen with the Russian intelligentsia as we get into the second wave, which we're going to be talking about in our next video? And it's also worth considering whether these study circles are really an exotic phenomenon or if a version of this exists today. And if it exists today, where is it? What is it? How do we have these conversations right now? Okay, number 3. Saunders notes that for the first generation of the intelligentsia, the way they discussed politics was by discussing literature. How exactly did this work? How effective of a political debate can you have this way? How might such debates have shaped the development of Russian literature itself? Do we do a version of this today when we debate popular culture? Sometimes when we're talking about popular culture, are we really talking about politics? Number 4. As you read, by the 1840s, the intelligentsia had divided into 2 camps, the Slavophiles and Westernizers. In your analysis, what are the main ideas of each group? So what I'm asking you to do is, sort of clarify for yourself, what does it mean to be a Slavophile? What does it mean to be a Westernizer? What are the key beliefs that they each have? What do they have in common, and where do they differ? Would you say that they are more similar or more different? Does either group, or do both groups, pose a genuine political threat to Nicholas's regime? So was Nicholas being paranoid about them, or was he right to be concerned? So those are my questions for you on the Saunders chapter. Now I'm going to ask you some questions about the primary sources. Now I know that I gave you the option to read either Kirievsky or Belinsky, although I hope that some of you will have had time to read both. So when you write your blog post, these questions, some of them address Belinsky, some of them address Kirievsky, some of them put the 2 authors together. I've sort of intentionally made lots of questions here so that you can pick and choose. I mean, as always, pick and choose what you find most interesting, but also, answer questions that pertain to things that you have read. And if, say you read Kirievsky but not Belinsky, just skip the Belinsky questions. So do whatever makes most sense for you. All right, first question. Let's talk about Belinsky's letter to Gogol. As you read, Gogol became known as a progressive social critic and a Westernizer through his novels The Inspector General and Dead Souls. Both are satires. The Inspector General makes fun of corrupt bureaucracy, and Dead Souls is a takedown of serfdom. These novels made Gogol the darling of the Westernizer intelligentsia, but in 1847 he published a new book where he was basically like, guys, you misunderstood me, I am not a Westernizer at all. So judging by Belinsky's letter, what exactly is he angry at Gogol for? What does he see as Gogol's real crime? So what I'm proposing to you is that he's not just mad at Gogol for saying, no, you guys don't get it, I have different ideas than you thought. What's underlying that? What's the root cause of Belinsky's frustration? And if we think about that root cause, how does that help us understand the values that the intelligentsia have? Like, what are their intellectual values as well as their political values? Number 2, the basic message of Gogol's 1847 book is, you all got me wrong. Dead Souls doesn't mean what you think it means. and neither does the Inspector General. So does Gogol have the right to claim the final word on what his work means? Or is Belinsky's interpretation equally valid? How do we think about these issues today? So what I'm asking you to assess is, who owns the meaning of a work? Does Gogol get the last word because he's the one who wrote it? Or is Belinsky's interpretation equally valid because once you put something out there in the world, it belongs to whoever reads it to interpret the way they want? And I think that's a question that's still with us. All right, number 3. The heart of Belinsky's letter is his declaration of a writer's duty to society. So make a close reading of the long paragraph in the middle of page 258 of the PDF. According to Belinsky, what role must a writer play in society? Do you agree with him that this is the role that writers have? Do writers have a social responsibility to speak truth to power, first and foremost? Why or why not? And what are the costs and benefits of placing that kind of duty on the shoulders of writers? Okay, now I have a couple of comparative questions for you. So number 4, Belinsky and Kirievsky take very different views on the value of rational thought. Their views are most clearly expressed in 2 passages. For Belinsky, this is on page 254. For Kirievsky, it's the top half of page 177. So I'm asking you to make a close reading of both paragraphs. If you only read one of these authors and not the other one, how would you characterize his views on the issue of rational thought? And if you read both authors, then I would like you to put them in comparison and explain how they differ. Who do you agree with more? Or if you read only one author, do you agree with this author, and why? Do you think they're both wrong? How do we think today about Kirievsky's assertion that rationality and enlightenment only make us miserable? Number 5. Belinsky and Kirievsky also differ on the place of religion in society. For Belinsky, take a look at pages 255 to 256. For Kirievsky, focus on page 194. How would you characterize each of their views? How do these views prompt the 2 writers to look to different parts of society to lead Russia into the future? How does this help us understand the differences between the Westernizers and the Slavophiles? And, arguably you could ask the same question about their views on rational thought as well. And a follow-up on that, according to Kirievsky, in this passage on page 194, the nobility have forgotten the orthodox way of life, but it has lived on in the peasantry. Orthodoxy pervades and gives meaning and unity to Russian peasant life. Does Belinsky's argument actually disprove or undermine Kirievsky's argument, or is this something that they could both agree on? Number 6. Kirievsky argues that it's a mistake to see Russian culture as a less developed version of European culture. Rather, it's an entirely different culture springing from different historical circumstances. One of the key points of his argument is that while Europe's intellectual inheritance came from ancient Rome, Russia's comes from ancient Greece. So look over pages 183 to 184 in Kirievsky's essay. For him, what are the major values that Europe has inherited from Rome, which he condemns? Would Belinsky entirely disagree with him that this is Europe's inheritance? And do you agree or disagree that these values are harmful? 7. We've established that Kirievsky is not a big fan of Western rationalism, or rationality, which he associates with the Roman way of thinking. On pages 191 to 193, he contrasts this with what he calls Greek or Eastern ways of thinking, which he says characterize Russian thought. What values does he highlight as characteristic of Greek thought? How do they differ from his characterization of Roman thought? What values does he attribute to each side? And does he convince you that Greek thought is actually a better way to be? Number 8. At various points in this essay, Kirievsky tells a highly suspect version of Russian history. For example, on pages 195 to 197, he claims that Russia was never subject to conquest, and thus Russians live harmoniously in a way that Europeans can never achieve. Now, if you have the most rudimentary knowledge of Russian history, you know that this is a fantasy. You know it, Kirievsky knows it, Kirievsky's audience knew it. So the question is, what do you make of his historical fantasy as a form of argumentation? Does it undermine his claims that he's kind of mobilizing historical memory in a very tendentious way? Or is this acceptable within the boundaries of a philosophical text? Basically what I'm asking you is his historical fantasy a good idea or a bad idea in terms of building a strong argument? Okay, and last but not least, Number 9, Kirievsky closes with a long meditation on the differences between European and Russian ways of life, as he sees it. He sums up by declaring that Russia must look to its Orthodox roots to find a new way forward, which will be better than the path that Europe is on. But he has a caveat. So read the last 2 paragraphs on page 207. Can you explain Kirievsky's vision of Russia's future in your own words? Okay, that's a ton of questions. I know this is a very long video, so I hope that you will find something of it in it of value for you. And I, as always, look forward to your blog posts.